Hey everyone, welcome to Home in Progress, sponsored by RepcoLite Paints and Benjamin Moore. I'm Dan Hansen, and thanks for joining me today. I've got a fun show lined up with a couple of really different but equally interesting topics. In the second half, we're going to take a deep dive into the life and legacy of legendary interior designer Sister Parish. We're going to look at her work, her philosophy, and the lessons that we can borrow to bring beauty and comfort into our own homes. But first, let's talk cars. You know, buying a car is a big deal. It's exciting, sure, but it can also be stressful, confusing, and more than a little bit overwhelming. Now, I recently went through all of this with my kid. He was buying his first car. He wanted to do it on his own. And throughout the very short process, it probably should have been a lot longer than it turned out to be. But through that very short process, he kept texting me questions. And honestly, I didn't have really good answers at all. I bought cars before in the past, plenty of them. But I was a little bit stumped when he was throwing these questions my way. And of course, that sent me down the research rabbit hole, and I stumbled across a great article on Kelley Blue Book on kbb.com. It was written by Chris Hardesty, the senior advice editor for Cox Automotive. He creates consumer-focused content for Kelley Blue Book and Auto Trader, and he helps people navigate everything from buying and selling to safety features and car maintenance and on and on and on. Now, before he did all of that, he spent 30 years in newspapers, leading research departments at the Mercury News and Newsday. He also served as the how-to guides editor at Wall Street Journal, wrote practical advice for the Home Depot, and has judged multiple Emmy Awards in news and documentary. Well, these days, he's based in Metro Atlanta with his wife and 2 kids, so he knows all about the joys and challenges of family vehicles and, of course, that eternal struggle to keep a minivan clean. Well, I reached out to Chris, and luckily for us, he agreed to join me on the show. Chris, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Dan. I really appreciate it.
All right, let's just start with this. Why is buying a car so stressful? I mean, there's the obvious thing, the money, that's a big deal. But is there more than the money that really, causes people to get stressed out about this? What's going on?
Well, there's a whole lot involved in buying a car, and you touched on perhaps the biggest thing, and that is the money. For most people, buying a car is the second largest purchase that they'll make, just behind buying a home. And so anytime you're dealing with money, that can be stressful, but also people don't really like change. And, if they've had this car for a long time, they know how it performs. It might not be performing well, and that's why they're wanting to get a new one, but it's their car, and the newness of something can be intimidating to some people. And with the way the automotive industry evolves, it evolves pretty quickly. And there are so many new features on cars that people are not familiar with. And so that adds into the anxiety of buying this expensive thing that's new to them and they know nothing about.
Sure. Oh, my goodness. So many things. So in your experience, what's one of the biggest mistakes people make?
It was spending too much money, buying something that they don't need, paying for features that they don't need in the car. Cars are loaded with all sorts of technology these days. And some of it is very helpful, and there's safety features that certainly are beneficial to the driver and to the people driving next to them and the pedestrians on the road and that sort of thing. But you don't necessarily need to have all of these bells and whistles. If you're buying a big truck, do you need to have retracting sideboard steps? No.
Right.
No, you don't need to have those things retract necessarily. And
I'm shorter, Chris, and I kind of need something that will just boost me up, like a little robot that will pick me up and put me in the front seat.
That's right, or a catapult.
Yeah, launch myself into the front seat.
So buying things or paying money for things that you don't need or features that you don't need is one thing. But the biggest mistake that many people make are buying accessories that they don't need.
Okay, what do you mean?
And I mean things like extended warranties in many cases. Those often are not necessary for a variety of reasons. They don't need to get window etching for their for the windows to help with theft recovery. They don't need to have their catalytic converter etched, those sort of upsells that dealerships can do, not deceptively, but just because, hey, here's a product, we're going to try to sell it to you.
Sure.
Um, and so when people fall into that, either the excitement or of getting the new car, or just the overwhelmingness of just the whole situation being overwhelming, and them saying, yeah, whatever, I'll take it. Um, they end up spending more money than they need to. And then another large problem rather, is that they finance these automobiles for too long. And,
Too long to try to bring their
yeah,
payments down a little bit, right?
exactly.
Is the idea.
Yeah. And so, if you were to, and this kind of gets into the negotiation aspect of things, but if you walk into a dealership and say, I want to spend no more than $400 a month, they would say, okay, we can have all sorts of financing options. And so they could sell you this automobile and stretch out the payments for so long that, yeah, it'll be, right at $400, but you're going to be paying for it for 8 years. And, and that's not a wise financial decision, or a wise decision in any aspect of it. And again, that's not anybody being deceptive toward you. You said
No,
you wanted to spend that much. You like this car. Here you go.
they're
Um,
helping you get there, but
Right, but you're going to be paying for it for a long time. And one of the a rule of thumb that has been around for a long time is the 24-10 rule, and that is that you put down 20% as a down payment on the car, you finance for no more than 4 years, and your total outlay makes up just 10% of your income.
total
And
outlay meaning the car, but like are you rolling insurance and stuff like
yeah,
that
yeah,
into
yeah.
that?
All the transportation costs, the gasoline,
Oh,
figuring in
gasoline.
maintenance, and many people have to pay for parking, and so yes, it's the whole kit and caboodle.
All of it should
Um,
come to about 10%.
yeah, and that's kind of that's an old rule of thumb. Ideally, that would be great. Unfortunately, with the price of automobiles as what they are, it's difficult for many people to adhere to that traditional rule of thumb. The average price of new cars is upwards of $49,000 now, and for used cars, it's like 25,500 or something like that. And so it's difficult for most people with the income that they have to finance a car for just 48 months and be able to afford that, especially to have it be within that
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
10% of their income. And so now, even though there's that rule of thumb, the reality is that the average length of an auto loan now for a new car, or for any car, is 72 months. That's a long time. And
No,
if
my kid came home and that was what he told me. So like I
mhm,
said, he wanted to do this all by himself and he came
yeah,
home and that's what he has, 72 months.
yeah, is that on a new car or a used car?
It's a used car.
And so now, the average age of an automobile on the road now is 13 years. So hopefully he'll be able to, whatever model year that is, it'll be able to last for a while. But the problem that a lot of people run into when they do stretch out these payments, it's longer than the warranty for a new car. So
Mm-hmm.
the typical warranty is 3 years. So even at 48 months, you're still going over that threshold. But if you're going to 5 years, 6 years, and even 7 years sometimes, um, it's going to be a long time before you build any equity into that car, so that when you trade it in to get another one, you're not going to have that much money put into it, and it's going to be a long time before you even are above water.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
underwater with that loan for so long. And so that's, unfortunately, that's a big mistake that people make.
What should people do differently? What can they do to try to avoid some of these things?
Well, be systematic about it. The best time to buy a car is when you don't need to have a car. And so if you can casually go and do thoroughly research, all of your options, all the automobiles that you see on the street, and oh, I like that. And you can look at Kelley Blue Book and read reviews of it and see if it would suit your needs, and evaluate all of your options for what you like, then sit down with your budget and see, well, this is what I can afford. And so now, with all these automobiles that I like, which of them can I actually afford? And be very realistic about that. It's not good to put yourself to overextend your budget for a car. I mean, a car is just a means to get from point A to point B, and doesn't have to be flashy. It just has to be reliable. Can it get me there and get me there safely?
Mm-hmm.
And that's all you really need. But you want this and that and the other. And so if you're able to sit down and evaluate, what do I need and what do I want, and of those wants, what can I afford, and how does that fit in with my overall financial plan? That's the beginnings of your whole shopping journey for buying a car. And then once you have that amount of money, once you've established the amount of money that you can or want to pay for the car, because just because you have the money doesn't mean you have to spend that much money. um, you know once you have established that price point, then you can actually start the whole shopping process.
There's a line in the article that I thought was really smart. Well, the article is smart, but remember, as a buyer, you must be the one in control through the entire car buying journey. And I know that's nobody is doing nefarious things. The people selling me the car, they're not doing anything bad, but they certainly want to be in control of that exchange. That's their goal, is to be in control of that exchange. That's how they do better. And I'm going to do better when I'm in control. And you started us off, how do we, make better decisions? And right off the bat, it's start that process before the car broke down in my, driveway. And now I need a new car. I bought a van a week before we were heading on vacation. And that's when we decided the van that we had it wasn't safe to take on the trip. So we have 3 days, 4 days to secure everything, find a new vehicle. We were not in control of that situation at all. We were at the whim or at the mercy of the people we shopped with and shopped at. So they took care of us. But you don't make great decisions when you're impulse, when you're stuck with a need, or impulse
Yeah.
shopping, same kind of thing.
Right. And it's not an impulse shopping like when you're at the grocery store and you're in the checkout line and you see the candy bars and you grab a candy bar.
Yeah.
But when you're kind of not forced into the situation, but you have to get a car because you're going on vacation. I had that situation when we moved from New York. My wife got an offer for a job in Atlanta, and we said, let's do it. And there's nothing keeping us in New York, so we left New York. But we didn't have a car. So if you're moving to suburban Atlanta, you need a car. So we had to go buy a car, and they wanted her to start in 2 weeks. Da 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 da. So we had to go buy a car, and on one hand, it was easier because we didn't have a trade to make, and so there wasn't that kind of eliminated that component of the whole car buying process. But figuring out what we needed after having not having a car for several years, we had to start from scratch and start
Scratch
that.
there,
So
yeah.
right, and it is, you feel that pressure of, oh my gosh, I have to find something, and and calling around, is we're seeing it on the website, and then you get to the dealership and the car, oh no, it was sold on Tuesday. So it can be that kind of just adds to the whole anxiety and stress of shopping.
So how do you narrow it down? I mean, what are some tips to help us choose the right car? We talked about people making mistakes and all of that. How do we, work through? We've got our budget. We talked about that. We've got that going on. But how do we start to identify this list of critical things versus the kind of the add-ons, the
Well,
extras?
the reliability is one of the things, and there's no key um, thing to look at with reliability. There are some manufacturers that have the reputation of being more reliable than others, but there are other people who have these quote unreliable vehicles, and drive them for 150,000 miles, as I can attest to. So a lot of it has to do with feel. If you know what you if you know how much money you can spend, and you have narrowed down these options that you like, you
Hmm.
think that, oh, I like the way that looks on the road, or Jane has one of those and she hasn't complained about it. You go and you test drive them, and that's a really important part of the process. You can certainly buy cars online, and that's an effective way to kind of broaden your options. But test driving that car is a big part of buying the vehicle.
What am I
Um,
looking for? Because that is a big part of your article. Right at the end, you talk about a bunch of different things that we should be looking for. Not just, can I see out the window? Does the seat go
mhm.
high enough so I can see, or does it really rev up when I go? But there were a whole bunch of different things you were saying to look for.
Oh yeah, can you reach the radio button? That kind of gets to
Is
the
that a
seat
short joke,
positioning.
Chris? Are you
It-
making a short joke, or you just?
no, I might be shorter than you are, Dan.
Oh, really? We should have a competition.
Yeah,
Okay, so we'll make sure we can reach the radio.
yeah. Reach the radio. Is it comfortable? Can you're sitting there for 15 minutes in a test drive. So ask if you can take it home overnight, or take a longer loop around the city. Because you should be comfortable when you're driving the vehicle. So if you can reach the pedals, and you can reach the steering wheel, and you can see over the steering wheel, and you can reach the radio button, can you get in the back seat? Do you have children? Are your car seats going to fit in there if your children are younger? And oh, what about your luggage? Can you if you do take this
Sure.
car on road trips, can you put the luggage in the back end? Is it too high for you to lift the luggage into, luggage that is loaded up with your week's worth of stuff? If you go to the grocery store, is stuff going to roll around in the back? Is there a way to secure the stuff that you have? If you are the outdoorsy person, is there a way to add a bike rack on the back end? Is there a trailer hitch to pull a little trailer if do weekend yard sale shopping and looking for dressers to refinish?
Hmm.
Those are all little things to consider, and again, those are things that you preferably are thinking about when you are thinking about the vehicle that you need in advance. And those are the kind of things that are often forgotten about or overlooked when you are in a rush.
So you
Uh,
see people do that. You see people forget these things. Some of them seem so obvious. Some of them you can't forget because they're right there. But
mhm.
you see people forget these?
Yeah, I hear of people
Yeah,
of doing that, and that's when one of the questions that I sometimes get from readers is, "Can I return this car? This is not what I imagined, or
right.
this is not what I bargained for. I didn't know this about this car." And unfortunately, there's no real return policy for vehicles. Once you sign it, then it's yours. And it could be that I just cannot see over it. And it's like, well, gosh, well, did you not test drive the thing?
Might
Yeah,
have
but you
figured
do
they'll
see.
get used to it. I'll
Ex-
get used to how this is and I'll figure it out and then
and there are
don't feel
some and
comfortable.
right, and there are some things that you may get used to, and some things that you might not get used to. One of the things that is becoming more common in vehicles are touch screens instead
Mhm.
of physical buttons, and having to touch something to move up the radio, or to adjust the air conditioning or heat, and not having any feedback on that. Sometimes you just want to turn a knob. I just need
Mhm.
to crank up the air. I don't need to touch a button 8 times. I just want to turn the knob real quick. And that's something that because buying a car is not something that people do very often. Most people don't do it very often. That's one of the changes, or one of the new things that people will see once they do get out and start kicking tires and taking test drives, is you know gosh, how do I turn on this radio? How do I
No, I completely
it,
get that.
yeah.
Because like my truck, it automatically connects to the phone and it will play whatever I was last playing. And it is a feature that it's so annoying. It's sometimes, once in a while, it's convenient. Most of the time, look, I didn't want to listen to this right now, but I wanted to go listen to the, baseball game. And I don't normally have the radio on in the truck. It took me forever to figure out where the radio I know where the radio the thing sits. I know where I need to push buttons, but I had to go through 3 menus to get to the point where I literally had a radio option now.
Hmm.
And yeah, I can only imagine what's going to
Yeah,
happen when my parents have that and how they're going to find the radio. They're never going to find the radio.
that's
I'll just
right.
tell them it's been removed from their vehicle. Just listen on your phone, Mom.
Yeah. And it's it's behind the steering wheel. So you're telling your mom, or, well, just go like this, and it's
Oh, I
go up.
know.
Yeah.
It's painful.
Um,
But I
yeah.
wouldn't think to test that when I'm doing my test drive. I'm not
Right.
looking at, just the normal functions of the car and how that,
Hmm.
if I like that, if I feel like that's going to be fun. And I can see where that would be
Right.
disappointing once I'm living with it.
Well, one of the you're talking about the radio, and there are plenty of audiophiles around, and cars have some pretty powerful audio systems, and not powerful just with just talking about the output, the wattage, and the number of speakers. Um, but there are a lot of high-end cars that have just like these, you know, you can create a symphony like in
Yeah.
your automobile. And so if you are one of those people, then you would want to not just turn on the radio to know how it turns on and how to adjust the volume, but to play your favorite music, and connect your phone to the vehicle so that you can play the same song in multiple vehicles, so that you can see how it sounds, because music or the radio is important to a lot of people, and especially for those that have long commutes or make regular long distance trips. They should enjoy their stereo.
No,
So
I think
that's just
that's all really, really good stuff. Just stuff I wouldn't think about, all of it.
Mhm.
So, we already talked about financing. I wanted to get to that, but we covered pretty much what I wanted to hit. Is I knew there was a kind of a rule of thumb. Talked about
Mhm.
that 10%, and you talked about the loan length is probably one of the biggest things to try to don't get, not suckered, but don't buy into the let's extend that loan out forever just to bring the payments down. That's dangerous ground.
It's very dangerous ground, because you'll be underwater on that loan for quite some time, and the longer you extend the loan, the higher interest rate you're going to be paying. So that means that you're going to be paying even more to borrow that money. Sometimes it might not be the best idea to pay cash for a car, because, or at least on a new car, you're missing out on some of the incentives that might be in play for financing, because a lot of times you might see ads for from an automaker that says 1,500 cash back, or whatever it is that
Those things come
they're
about
saying.
when I do financing. They don't come
Yeah, they
about if I would pay cash.
correct, and they only come about when you're financing through that manufacturer's financing arm.
Okay.
So many of those ads that say $1,500 cash back, or 3.9% financing for 60 months or whatever. In that fine print, it says if you use GM's financing arm, or
Mm-hmm.
Nissan's financing arm, or Toyota's financing arm. Not if you get it through your local bank, and not if you get it through your credit union, or not if you come in with cash money, and not cash money like a suitcase full of money, but with
I've got five of
checking.
them sitting with me right now. I'm
Yeah.
deciding which car I want to buy cash
Well,
or
just
pay
make sure you
cash
can
for.
lift them into the trunk, right?
I've got a helper. When you've got five
Okay.
suitcases of money, you've got a helper who can lift it
That's
for you.
right. Well, and that's a good point about having that much money. So if you had enough money to pay $49,000, the average transaction price for a new automobile,
Uh-huh.
then it seems like that would be the best thing to do. Well, no, not necessarily, because there might be a 0% interest rate going on for people who have the good enough credit to qualify for that. But there's also this money that you might get back for
All right.
financing it through the automaker. And what you can do in many cases, and you should certainly read your fine print, is take out that loan from the automakers financing people, and take advantage of those discounts and incentives, and then pay off the loan with that money that you have in your five suitcases that you got from Dan. And
Gotcha.
then,
Gotcha.
and then you'd be able to take advantage of those discounts and incentives, but not have to worry about paying it every month.
Here's I don't know,
So,
maybe it's a dumb question. So let's say my kid has this big loan, a lengthy loan. Is there any way to change that? Like a house, if things go right, I can refinance, with the interest rates, if that makes sense. I can
mhm.
have some option. He did the loan through the dealer. Is there any way around what he's got or what he's in for?
You not immediately. If he recently bought this vehicle, then probably not immediately through that lender, but he might be able to go to his credit union or his bank and say, hey, I have this loan that I just took out, and now I see you're advertising these better rates. How could I, do this? And then they might be able to refinance that loan at the better
All right.
rate. There is such a thing as refinancing car loans, and
Okay.
that's becoming more. Rates are still higher than what most folks would like, but they're still better than what they could be. But so some of these higher interest rate loans that people have taken out, they might be able to refinance them, but the car has to be worth what you have remaining on the loan. So that kind of gets back to
Nope.
taking out
Yep.
those extended loans. So if you owe this much money on the loan, but the car is, worth,
You're gonna have to cough up some.
$10,000, then you got to come up with a difference, because nobody's going to loan you more money than the thing's worth.
All
So
right, so let's talk about lease or buy a minute. I know this is kind of fast, but there's a couple options, and if you don't do this on a regular basis, it's a toss up. It seems. How do we navigate that lease or buy? Which is better?
it's better for you or better for this person. It doesn't mean that it's wrong or which one is better
Hmm.
for everybody. It's because everybody has different circumstances. Typically, a lease will provide lower monthly payments for people who are worried about that. And I need, before I talk any more about that, never shop for a monthly payment. I mean, we talked about that right at the very beginning. How don't walk into the place and say, I want to pay $400 a month. So never shop on a payment. Shop on the out the door price of the car. That's period. Now, to talk about lease versus buy, people have different situations and what's important for them, what's important to them, and what their needs are. And many people like to have new cars every couple of years to keep up with the latest technology,
Hmm.
and they just like that new car smell, I guess. So they can lease these cars, which typically have lower monthly payments, which is a benefit for many people. The downside of leasing is that after this relatively short period of, say 36 months, you have nothing. So you go and turn the car in. So you've been basically renting this car for 3 years, and you have nothing to show for it. In addition to that, those 3 years worth of monthly payments, you also had to put down some money when you got the car,
Hmm.
and that money covers the depreciation of the car over that period. So, the amount due at signing is, $4,900, and so you got to pay $4,900, and then you pay $300 a month, which is an attractive thing, but you had to shell out that down
Right.
payment, and then at the end of the period, you have nothing.
Now, I could potentially buy it at that
Correct.
point, and
Yes.
sometimes or often that price reflects what I've put into it.
The residual value of the car is established when you sign the lease.
Hmm.
So the lender, which is the automaker, is kind of estimating that this car is going to be worth this much money at the end of the term. And so in 3 years, the remaining value of this car will be, $19,000. So we'll set that, and it's written down here, right here. Residual value is $19,000. So you pay your down payment, you pay your 3 years worth of monthly payments, and then you go to either return the car and walk away, or you buy the car for that price. And so if the market is good and the loan rates are favorable, or you have $19,000 just sitting around, you can buy that car for that remaining price. And there are some advantages to that. You
You
know
know the
that
vehicle.
you know the vehicle, you've been comfortable with it, you know its maintenance history, you know its quirks, you know its benefits, and so on and so forth. So that is an option that some people will take. Or, like I said, you can just turn it in and then lease the next one. And oftentimes there's incentives for people returning a lease to get another one. And if you feel like you need more time, then most of the time they'll let you tack on some more months to that lease.
Now, one of the bigger issues with the lease is that generally maybe always you're limited to your mileage, right? Your mileage, you're allowed a certain amount
hmm
for a
Yes,
year.
yes, and that number is the mileage cap. And so, if you have this car for 3 years, and the mileage cap is 12,000 miles, then at the end of the term, at the end of the lease, if that odometer is more than 36,000 miles, then you will pay a certain amount per mile that's over 36,000. And that could be 18 cents, it could be 20 cents, and you don't think that means much. But if you're talking about 1,000 miles or 5,000 miles, then it does start to add up. And
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the whole budgeting process that we were talking
Oh,
about early
yeah.
on, is that even if you're doing a lease, you need to figure out what your budget is and anticipate that. So, one of the calculations that you should do is how many miles do I drive? And again, be realistic about it. Nobody's going to penalize you because you drive so much, unless you get into a lease and for, you know, 10,000 miles a year and you drive 18,000 miles a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's really gonna be bad. So sit down and figure out how much you actually do drive. So a lease is good for somebody who does not drive more than 10 or 12,000 miles a year. It's good for somebody who likes to have the latest technology and safety
Sure.
features
Yeah.
in a car. It's good for somebody who doesn't like to customize their car and they don't want to put in a fancy radio, fancy stereo system. They don't want to, add, fancy wheels. They don't want to wrap it or paint it or, do any customization to it.
Mm-hmm.
They're not good for people who want to build equity in their car because you're not going to build equity into it. They're not good for people who like to put, like big
All that
big
customizing.
wheels, all the customization. Leasing is not for me, not because I customize my car, but because I want to build equity. I just don't want to rent the thing. And that's basically
Yeah.
what,
It
what
worked
you're
out
doing.
once really well for us. We did a van and it was the payment thing.
hmm
It was the most reliable thing we could get. The price was really good for the payments. And then they did they estimated what we would pay for it in 3 years.
hmm
And that was a really reasonable price because we were shopping at that point for a used vehicle and we
hmm
were finding 5-year-old used vehicles that were around that same price for way more mileage than what we thought we'd have at the end of 3 years because we knew we weren't going to come anywhere close to that
Yeah.
12,000 that they wanted. We were at like 6,000 a year. So in the end, that one worked out really well. I don't think we
hmm
did it again after that one. We just bought that van and we're very happy. But
Yeah.
it was tense because it was not something my family had ever. They hadn't done the leasing thing,
hmm
so I was in a little bit of new territory. I was sure I was gonna have some unspoken rule that I missed somewhere, and I was gonna get hammered.
Yeah, and you might have been, but just because you were unaware that you could, only drive this far, and you actually drove that far. When you return the car, they'll do an inspection and see that you've taken care of it, and and if and everybody has their different rules, but one manufacturer is pretty detailed about what they consider to be normal wear and tear, and what kind of allowance they will give for damage, and if the scrape or scratch can be covered up with a credit card, but it's only one of those per body panel. And so they're very specific about what they consider to be normal wear and tear. And I don't want to say that they're really nitpicky, but hey, they're in there to make money, and they want to be sure that they can refurbish this vehicle and sell it to somebody
Right.
else.
No, I do remember that. That was really stressful. That waiting, as they were going to go over the vehicle, and
Mm-hmm.
we were very careful. We had little kids, lots of them, 5 of them,
Uh-huh.
and so I had a little basket in the back for any boots that had the slightest bit of. We were very careful, but there
Yeah.
was that tense moment of, were we careful enough?
Yeah.
And turns out we were all right.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I get that. So, like,
Um,
trade in or sell, that's another big thing that comes up, right as we get to the end of this.
mhm.
What's the best? I mean, trading in is so easy,
It is.
but I'm taking a
It,
hit, probably, maybe.
yeah, it's maybe a little bit, but your time is worth something, and your frustration is worth something, or the absence of frustration. And so sometimes taking the easy way out is, or the quick way out
Hmm.
is the best. And again, it gets into the whole timing issue again. If you have the time to wait, then you could sell it yourself, on the open market, and you'll get more money because you're cutting out the middleman. But it's going to take time to sell it. You're going to have to, wait for somebody who's looking for, that minivan that used to tote around 5 children,
Hmm.
and or you could just go trade the thing in and just wipe your hands clean of it and be on your way. And depending on what the model is, it might be a couple $100, it might be $1,000. But at what point do you want to say, well, this $1,000 would be, the extra $1,000 would be great to have, but I don't have time to
Well, right. The
sell it
time
on
of
my own.
selling it, finding a place to put it where I'm going to be able to sell it easily. I could put it in
Hmm.
my yard, but nobody's going to go by. Fixing it, getting it all ready and repaired for somebody else, right? If I'm selling it, I've kind of got some obligations there.
That's right, and and you want to, yeah, you want to have it looking awfully pretty. It's worth mentioning that Kelly Blue Book does have the private sellers exchange, where people do buy and sell cars from private owners, and there you can go to kbb.com and read all about it and participate. But even so, that it still is time consuming for you, or it can be time consuming. And if your car is paid off, that makes it better, and because that would mean that you theoretically would have more time to wait, because you're not making payments on that car
Hmm.
anymore.
Hmm.
So if you're going to take new payments on this, the only thing is that if you were financing it and you wanted to bring that
Wanted that money.
cost down, and that's the benefit of trading in, is that it reduces that cost of the new vehicle. And if you're financing it, then that means that you're financing less money, which means that you are borrowing less money, and you'll have to not pay interest on that money. And some states, I'm not even going to pretend that I can remember which ones they are, but some states deduct the amount of the trade in from the taxable amount of the car sale. So if you're buying a $30,000 car, but you're trading in a $10,000 car, they're going to take that $10,000 off of the $30,000 sticker price, so that you're only taxed on
Okay.
the $20,000. And so that is another benefit in some states that would push somebody to trade in rather than sell.
I know for my kid, he had, he took care of that was, he took okay care of his
Hmm.
vehicle. He did not take care of the inside. It was very messy. It's like riding in a dumpster.
Hmm.
And that's what we told him. And when he's getting ready to do this, he made this purchase. He did this all of a sudden, he wants a new vehicle. And 24 hours later, he's got one.
Hmm.
Impulse. But I watched him. I came home from work and he's emptying this entire vehicle out onto my driveway. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm trading it in." I said, "But you need like a week to clean it." He said, "No, they said just get my stuff out." And I thought, for his sake, for his situation, thank God, he was able to just trade that thing in, because I didn't want to be a part of the week-long exorcism that vehicle needed. And they'll take care of it for him. And they gave him less money, but he got enough money that he was happy.
Yeah, and that's the thing. The week that it would take to clean that car, to put it into the condition that he would sell it, on his own, probably is much less than what he, or much more than what he was able to get from the dealer. But that brings up another point about buying used cars, is that you know the exterior might be dirty, the interior might be dirty, but that can be cleaned. What's more challenging is problems with what's under the hood. And people often wonder when buying a used car whether the mileage on the odometer is more important than the vehicle's age. And there's no set answer for that between those two, because the most important thing is having the maintenance records. Because you can have a car with 100,000 miles on it that had its oil changed every 8,000 miles and its tires rotated every 5,000 miles, and it has gone through all of these different routine maintenance procedures and serviced on time for the past 2 years. Wait, I thought you said 100,000 miles. Well, if it has been taken care of, then it doesn't matter that it has 100,000 miles, or if it's 2 years old and has 8,000 miles, because those 8,000 miles could have well, not eight, let's say 30,000 miles.
Yeah.
And if it has not been taken care of, then those 30,000 miles are far worse than the 100,000 miles of the vehicle that has been serviced regularly. So
this is a dumb question then. How do I accomplish? How do I get those records for my own vehicle? I don't save every receipt. Is there a vehicle log somewhere that when my mechanic does something?
Well, you should save all of your
I should
records.
save all my receipts.
Yeah.
What I
you
meant to
should.
say was, of course, I've saved every single thing that's ever
Right.
been done
And they're in
to
that
my
suitcase
vehicle.
with all of your money, right?
It's probably, instead of the money, that's what's weighing that suitcase down. It's all these repairs.
Yeah.
So I should be saving all of that
Yeah,
stuff.
save those, and so that you can, if you did sell it on your own, you could show the potential buyer that is, look, I have taken such good care of this car. Yeah, there's Cheerios in the seat cushions, but I've taken care of it. Here's all my oil changes. Here's this. Here's that. Here's the other. And then that shows them that you have taken care of this car, and it lends credence to the notion that, oh, this is going to be a reliable vehicle and a good purchase for me. But there are services, vehicle history report services like AutoCheck and Carfax, that when a service center reports it to those vehicle history report folks, then they're retained there based on the vehicle identification number, and so it would show you a log of these oil changes and that have taken place, this service that was taken place, this recall that was handled. Oh, here's an accident that where the airbag was deployed.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an accident with no airbag. Here's da da da. So it gives the history of the vehicles.
But not
Service.
all service centers report that.
No, and if you were a shade tree mechanic, then they would have no idea that you routinely change the oil every quarter. Yeah, so that's why you should save those records, because those AutoCheck and Carfax don't have everything, because
Okay.
they only have what is reported to them.
So even though I haven't, I will start, and that's better than not.
Yeah. And if you routinely went to, if you use the dealership for your oil changes, they would have a record of all of those. If you used a one of those standalone franchises, like a quick service oil change place, if you use the same one all the time, then they probably have those records and could print them out for you.
All right.
But the problem really comes from, the corner mechanic, the service station at the gas station, or you do it yourself and there's no real record.
No record.
Yeah.
All right. Last little bit here. I've got a few questions. Just see once how fast we go. What about extended warranties? I think you covered it. Worth it? Skip it? Or is it one of those things? It just depends.
I guess you could say it depends. My wife had one on her car years ago, and just because she didn't want to fiddle with it, hey, if something breaks, I want it to be fixed. Well, there was only one problem with that car, and it was just some sort of solenoid, and it was a covered repair, but the deductible was more than what the cost of the repair was. So it was a complete waste of money. One of the mistakes people make when buying a car is buying an extended warranty for this car that still has 2 years of its factory warranty left.
Sure.
So that's just wasted money. So in general, there are two basic types of extended warranties. One is one that includes these repairs, and others that exclude repairs. And you would tend to in most cases you would want one that excludes certain things, because then you know going in that this is not going to cover this, that, and the other. Period. All these other things it will take care of. Whereas these inclusion ones, they'll say, "Oh, we'll take care of this, that, and the other," and then you're limited to those repairs.
Those things, yeah.
But most of the time, an extended warranty is not something that you need to do, because most of the time people don't use them.
If somebody's going to remember only one thing of all of the things we talked about, what's the one thing you'd want them to make sure they take to the bank on this?
Never overextend your budget for a car. There are many components that flow into that, but it is a car that's going to get you to work, to get you to visit your family, to get you to the grocery store, and so forth. Work, school, food, and family. That's what your car should be for. It doesn't have to be, the biggest. It doesn't have to be the flashiest. It doesn't have to have all of the bells and whistles. It just has to get you safely from point A to point B. And don't spend too much money on it.
Well, Chris, I think all of that is really good info. I'm going to put a link to the article in the show notes so people can check that out. Do you have contact information or anything like that, places where they can find more of what you do?
Yeah, if they go to that article, down at the bottom of the article is a little bio box, and if they click on that, then that will be a link to all of the other articles that I've written about buying and owning and selling vehicles for Kelley Blue Book.
All right. Definitely recommend you check that out. I'll put a link in the show notes, so look for that. Chris Hardesty, thanks so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Dan. I appreciate it.
All right, it's time to shift gears. Sister Parish was a legendary interior designer, widely credited with shaping what we now think of as classic American style. In just a minute, we're going to take a look at her life, her design philosophy, and most importantly, we'll pull out some practical takeaways that you can use to bring that same sense of comfort and personality into your own home. That's all coming up right after this. Home in Progress is brought to you by RepcoLite Paints and Benjamin Moore. Top tier paint, expert advice. Your next project is way easier than you think it's going to be. Well, several years back, we hosted what we called color and design events. I'm sure some of you remember them. I met a lot of you out there. They were fun evenings. We had a bunch of good food. We had a lot of conversation about color and design. Originally, when we did those, we talked about Benjamin Moore's Color of the Year. That was kind of how we launched the Color of the Year. But eventually, as we did a few of those, we realized there was something bigger to talk about than just Color of the Year. And we started looking at some of the biggest names in the world of architecture and interior design. I mean, we hear these names all the time, but we wonder, or at least I always wondered, what makes them geniuses? We always hear these names and we hear the moniker of genius attached to them, but I always struggled to figure out why. What do they do that nobody else thought to do? And most importantly, the thing that I really wondered about is what can we, as just regular people, learn from them and their work and their process? And so with that in mind, we started looking at some of these pioneers, some of these geniuses, and we looked at Frank Lloyd Wright. We looked at Iris Apfel. And then most recently, we looked at David Lynch and architect Frank Gehry. Now, each one of those events, when we focused on those folks, was an incredibly profound experience for me. I mean, I learned so much during those events, and I'm still living off of it today. It's still impacting me. It's really amazing how big a difference that has made in my life. Well, because of that, because it was so much fun, because there was so much to learn, it makes me want to do it again. And someday we will get back to hosting events like we used to. But with this show, right now that I've got this opportunity to dig into these movers and shakers, in this world of creative thought and interior design and architecture. And so I thought, why not do that? Why not do exactly that? And that's going to be today, the rest of the show. And I'll let you know right up front, the podcast version of this show is going to contain this full discussion about this person that I want to talk about. The radio version, it's going to be somewhat edited. Anyway, with that said, I want to look at one of the most influential interior designers in American history. Somebody whose work didn't just shape how wealthy, super snobs, super rich, super fancy families decorated their homes, but really the style helped define what we now think of as American style. This designer's rooms were comfortable, they were lived in, they were elegant, but they were never cold. They were personal, they were layered, they were warm. Now, her name was Sister Parish, and we've got to start by doing some explaining about the name because it's a weird name, Sister Parish. And no, she wasn't a nun, which was my first thought when I stumbled upon her on the name. I thought she was a nun. She's not a nun. She was born Dorothy May Kinnicutt in 1910. Right in the middle of New Jersey's old money horse country, an area known for grand estates, fox hunting, the kind of genteel lifestyle where nobody worked in the trades. And that made what she did later all the more surprising. Now, her family, getting back to her name, her family called her sister from the time she was just a little girl, as in the sister to her younger brother. And somehow that name just stuck. Later on, when she got married, she married Henry Parrish II at 19, and there you go, Sister Parish. And in the design world, that name is absolutely legendary. Now, she had no formal training, no apprenticeships. She never even read a book on decorating. At least there's quotes of her explaining that. She never read a book on decorating. What she did have was taste, she had instinct, and she had a confidence that was really rare. A confidence that, oh man, I wish I had that kind of confidence. But alas, I do not. And I think sometimes half of genius is just confidence and the willingness to go ahead, which is why I'm no genius. Anyway, in the 1930s, during the Depression, that's when Sister Parish's story really gets moving. At least into the design world. At this point, the Depression, her father's finances, her husband's finances, both are being hit really hard, and to help things out, to help everybody out of that pit that they're in, Sister Parish does something practically unheard of for women in her social class. She decides to go to work. So she rents a small 14 by 14 room in Far Hills, New Jersey. She rents it for like $35 a month, something like that. She furnishes it with a wicker chair and a desk. That's it. And she hangs a sign on the door that says Mrs. Henry Parrish II, Interiors. And that was it. That was the launch of her design career. And it didn't take long for word to spread. Friends and then friends of friends started calling. They were really blown away by what she'd done with her own home. She'd painted the floor. She'd used ticking fabric for curtains, layered white on white with pops of bright color, all kinds of different things like that. It was fresh, yet it kind of felt familiar. It felt homey. It was traditional, but it was really personal. It was very, very unique, and they wanted her to do that for them, and so she started doing that. And as time went by, word spread and spread and spread. She was taking homes that felt like they came out of a catalog, so they were perfect in that way, and she breathed a soul into them. Sometimes these these rooms of perfection don't feel to really have a soul, and that's what she was doing, and that's part of the genius here. And as she was doing that, just like that, everything was off and running. Her reputation just exploded. And soon she was designing homes for some of the wealthiest and most influential families in the country. Names like Astor, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller. Her style stood out. It was warm. It was refined. It was full of personality. It was completely different from the stiff formality that was common at the time. Now, she continued her work, and in the late 1950s, Sister Parish decorated a Georgetown townhouse for a young senator named of JFK, John F. Kennedy, and his wife Jacqueline. And when the Kennedys moved into the White House in 1961, Jackie turned to the one decorator who had already made her feel at home in her previous space of residence, and Sister Parish became the first interior decorator ever hired by a first lady. And she went to work on the private family quarters in the White House, including the famous Yellow Oval Room where JFK would receive foreign dignitaries. Now, when she arrived on the site to get the work underway, that space was formal and really cold. It was more like a stage set. than a sitting room. But she reimagined it completely, and she had the walls painted a soft, warm, rich yellow. She brought in delicate white and gold woodwork, antique French furniture, and her trademark chintz. Gotta have that. There were framed botanical prints, elegant lamps with custom shades, and everywhere you look, go Google it. Everywhere you look, there are small human touches, embroidered cushions, delicate fringes, books stacked on side tables, stuff like that. It wasn't just stylish. She kind of, made the room feel alive. It felt lived in. It felt like a room where real people came and read books and had conversations and had tea. It felt like home. Way better than that formal, cold setting that it previously had been. It was graceful and welcoming, and in the words of one observer, it was, quote, a triumph of charm over grandeur. However, while it was a triumph, the victory lap didn't last that long because, according to popular legend, Sister was dismissed from that project after she scolded a young Carolyn Kennedy for putting her feet on the furniture. Now, we don't know if that's technically the full truth, but even then, I like the story. It's kind of a story that's lived on, kind of like urban legend or something. And I like it because it captures something essential about Sister Parish. She had standards. She didn't bend them. And whether you were a society hostess or a part of the first family, you were going to abide by the rules or else. And in this instance, the or else meant Sister Parish could take a hike and go find work somewhere else. And she did. She did just fine. We don't need to worry about her. That was Sister Parish in a nutshell. She would be affectionate at one moment, razor sharp the next. And speaking of razor sharp, here's another story that I love. She was famous for her custom of wheeling. She'd come on a job site. She's in a home. Somebody has brought her in their home to help them with their design, to help them pull this space together. And she had a custom for bringing this empty tea cart and wheeling it through the client's homes, at the beginning of this project. She didn't have a clipboard. She didn't, wander around quietly pondering and imagining what the space was going to be. She'd get her little tea cart and she'd rattle along through the hallways and the rooms, and she'd remove anything that didn't meet her standard. All of it. Just pull it out of the space. Trinkets, figurines, lamps, pillows. If she didn't like it, it's getting yanked. And you can just picture it. I can picture it anyway. The very wealthy, nervous people standing there watching Sister Parish roll that little cart straight towards their little favorite shelf of porcelain knickknacks. No doubt they were nervous. They were sweaty. They were freaking out because she was ruthless. She was brutal. She knew what she wanted. She knew what she liked. And she made sure that if it didn't meet those standards, it was on the way out. That was her. She was witty, she was precise, she was fearless, and she was always, always, always in control of the room, both literally and figuratively. She hated mid-century modernism. She called it sterile, lifeless. She believed the room should reflect people and not be these utterly immaculately, pristine, sterile spaces. There's a quote where she says, quote, "There's nothing wrong with a little clutter, keeps you honest," right? We are as honest as can be at my house, if that's true. She even joked that some minimalist houses were so empty that, quote, even ghosts would feel uncomfortable. Really hated, that modernist look. She had a sharp sense of what belonged in a space, not just what matched. That's important, what belonged, not just what matched. She wasn't just decorating homes, she was redefining them. Changing how rooms were used, how they made people feel. She was setting the tone, the emotional tone of a home and a room, not just the look of the space. And she made a home, not just a showplace, but a reflection, not just a backdrop for your life, but an expression of the lives of the people who lived in it. And her genius and her approach, all of that still hold up today. So with that in mind, let's look at just 3 takeaways from Sister Parish's playbook. 3 things that you and I can apply right away, today, in our own homes, in our own designs. And I want to start with this particular idea because it's such a freeing idea. The concept is this: contrast creates character. Okay, contrast creates character. What am I getting at? Sister Parish believed that the charm of a room, the thing that gives it its soul or its character, all of that is found in contrast. She was known to accomplish this by pairing things like a delicate antique side table with a simple wicker chair, or hanging an ornate chandelier over a rag rug. The rooms didn't look like they came or were ordered straight out of a catalog. They looked like they had kind of evolved over time. She once said, quote, "To be perfect, the perfect must be imperfect. And it's a little bit of a confusing quote, especially when you're just hearing it. But here's the point. She's saying if a room has too much polish, or if it matches too well, if it's just too perfect, the space stops feeling real. It starts to feel staged, like a hotel lobby or maybe a magazine spread or an Instagram photo shoot. But when you bring in something worn, something handmade, something with a little age, something imperfect, that piece or those pieces begin to ground everything else in the space, and it brings humanity into the room. So when we layer the old and the new, the shiny and the worn, we're creating character, and that's what makes a space memorable. It's really important. That's the piece that makes a space memorable. So how do you do that? Well, that antique dresser from your grandma, you keep it, you paint it, or maybe you don't paint it, whatever. You just make sure you use it. Bring it into your space. Mix in a modern lamp. Hang a new mirror above it. If you've got a matching dining room set, swap out a couple of the chairs. Find something vintage or upholstered that you can put in their place. You can do this with textures too. Pair shiny brass with weathered wood. You can hang modern art over old paneling. The list goes on and on. The point isn't really to give you a rundown of things to do. The bigger point is to just make the concept clear. Let opposites play together. That's where life is. That's where the soul of the room comes about. The contrasts really create the character. That's where the room starts to feel like you. Now, the second big takeaway from Sister Parish is this, and it's right along those lines. You want to fill your space with the things that matter to you. She wasn't interested in rooms that looked like they came straight off a showroom floor. Those were way too perfect. They were too matched. They were lifeless, soulless. She called those kinds of spaces unstudied and unconvincing. Her own rooms, the rooms that she created, they were anything but. They had texture, they had story, they had soul. You'd walk into one and you'd kind of feel like it had grown around the people who lived there, not been installed overnight by a design team on a deadline. Basically, everywhere you look, she had something interesting set around. There was something to discover. Books, needlepoint, pillows, botanical prints, painted floors, crocheted throws, white wicker. She had a lot of that. Dog portraits, quilts, handmade lampshades, you name it. Lots and lots of chintz. Lots and lots of chintz. Nobody brought a room to life with chintz quite like Sister Parish did. So she did all of that, but none of those items that she's grabbing and throwing into that space, I shouldn't even use the word throwing. None of it was random. None of it was just thrown in there. None of it was just stuff that she got just to fill space. Each of these items were personal, and they were layered in very carefully, each one telling a part of a story. So how do we do that in our own home? Well, I think we start by thinking of decorating less like styling a space and more like storytelling. I think there's a lot of power in thinking about decorating as if it were storytelling. And don't feel like you need to tell this story all at once. Sister Parish often said that a room should feel collected over time. That's what it should feel like. And that's giving you permission to wait, to go slow, to let your space evolve, to live in it and let it take shape. So let the room speak. Let the pieces speak. And I know that sounds crazy to a lot of you, but they really will. It's really unusual, but they really will. And I'm not saying that they're speaking with voices, because maybe you were thinking that that's what I'm hearing are voices because, you've known me over the years and you maybe think that seems par for the course. I'm not hearing literal voices, but the pieces do tell me, what the room needs and where it needs to go. And a lot of the times it's not what I was initially thinking. I start putting a room together with a very clear vision of where I want to go. And as I've done this, I've collected pieces over time, pieces that really speak to me. And I found that the room has gone in way different directions than I ever would have thought. Initially, the room spoke and the room pushed me in another direction, and it's a way better direction. So give yourself time. The pieces will speak to you. The room will speak to you. And another thing that will help with this is if you ignore the pressure to follow any one style. If you are landlocked by a style that you're trying to stay within, it's very tough to stretch outside of that and to find these pieces that matter to you because you've got to find pieces that matter that fit within your style. Throw that idea of style out the window. Just try that once. It's so absolutely freeing. You're going to have the freedom to collect anything, whatever you love can fit into this space. And it sounds like it wouldn't work. It absolutely does work. And over time, as you're bringing those pieces in, the space that takes shape is deeply personal and it becomes deeply meaningful. And when you're decorating with things that matter, it really starts to feel like home. Even if it doesn't look perfect, it feels like the space you want it to be, and there's so much power in that. All right, last thing. Sister Parish believed that homes should be lived in. So comfort over perfection. That's the third big concept. A home should be lived in, not admired from a distance, not guarded like a museum, but used, enjoyed, relaxed in. And that's something that we need to hear today. We're surrounded by images of impossibly perfect rooms. Curated, staged, filtered images on Instagram, social media, you name it. But Sister Parish reminds us real homes aren't about impressing anyone. They're about living well in your space. I've got this old desk that's a really good reminder of this for me. It's an antique oak desk, beautifully grained, but it's marked up with a couple of dark rings and what looks like an ink spill. Something from a long time ago. When I bought it, I fully intended to refinish it. But the longer I lived with it, the more I came to love all of those old imperfections, those old marks, the rings, the stains, all of that. They told a story. And I really, as time went by, I realized I didn't want to erase that. The desk spoke to me. The piece spoke to me and told me what really should be done with it. And I was listening, and so I left it. Now, people think I'm nuts. People come and see the desk. First thing they ask is, why haven't I fixed it yet? Or did I know I could do that? And yeah, I got to tell them, I know I can. I've chosen not to because of all these reasons. And when I tell them, they kind of look at me like I'm nuts. But I don't care. Peace works in my space, and I like it. And that's really all we're after, That's what we all want with our home. We want the home to work for us. We want the rooms to feel welcoming. We want our space to feel like our space. So think about your space. Think about Sister Parish. Think about those concepts and see what you can apply today to help you get where you want to go when it comes to putting your room together. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Home in Progress, brought to you by RepcoLite Paints and Benjamin Moore. Big thanks to Chris Hardesty for joining us and sharing such helpful advice on car buying. And thanks to you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe so you never miss another episode. And if you've got a second, leave a quick rating or review. It helps more people find us. We really appreciate it. So if you could do that, I'd love it. You can find links to today's topics, photos, and more over at RepcoLite.com, so check that out. And while you're there, check out our other, paint guides, our how-to videos, and past episodes. Lots of great stuff right there. All right, we'll be back next week with more stories, more tips, more advice, all of that. Until then, I'm Dan Hansen. Thanks for listening.